Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Sunday Night SitDown. I am your host, Miracle Jones. The Sunday Night SitDown is the opportunity for us to go one-on-one with politicians and political advisors and people who are decision makers, get to know a little bit more about them, what motivates them, their political philosophies, and how we can support. And today we have a very special guest, Pennsylvania's very own Senator Art Haywood, joining us today to talk a little bit about some of the work that he's doing, who he is, what brings him joy. And with that, we want to welcome to the program Senator Haywood.
Well, thanks for allowing me on.
We're really happy to have you. And just start off, can you just talk a little bit about what motivated you to get into the world of politics from the very beginning?
So for many years, I was just a political observer and voter. I did support Jesse Jackson in 1984 and 1988. In fact, most of the folks I supported, they actually didn't win. But in 2008, Barack Obama ran, and I decided to volunteer for his campaign, knocking on doors. When he won, it really inspired me to look at what I could do in government. And thereafter, I ran for my local township commissioner in my neighborhood and won, and then ran for state senate in 2014 and won. So I would say the Barack Obama example is what got me into politics.
Oh, thank you for that. And, some things have changed since 2008. In your perspective, what has been some of the biggest changes that you've watched over the past few years?
To me, in terms of politics, I think there's been two big changes. One is the power of the Black Lives Matter movement. That movement raised the level in the culture of focusing on the disparities facing African Americans and put a new level of power toward seeking social justice and racial justice. That was a big change. The second big change has been the unfortunate attempt to have a overturn of the 2020 election with the insurrection back in January 6th, and having Americans trying to deny an election is a big change in our nation.
And you talk about these big changes. How do you approach issues? Social issues happen, unrest happens. We don't know everything, as individuals. So we're always learning. How do you approach, these big changes and issues and trying to learn about different people and how policies impact them?
For me, I think the most important thing to do is listen and recognize that you don't have all the answers, maybe don't have any answers, and it's important to listen. For example, I was appointed to be the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee in the Pennsylvania State Senate. Before I started to make policies and suggestions about what should happen for people who benefit from Medicaid and other public assistance programs, I thought it was important to find out from folks what they wanted, what they needed. And so back in 2019, my office did what we called as a poverty tour. And we went to several parts of Pennsylvania, McKeesport, Clinton, Erie, Scranton. And we heard from folks about what it takes to get out of poverty. What were the obstacles to getting out of poverty? So based upon hearing from individuals, we came up with 20 recommendations to help folks get out of poverty based upon what the government is doing, how government is holding people back. So for instance, we learned that there were four main things holding people in poverty. One, low pay. And we have the lowest pay in Pennsylvania in the nation. 7.25 is the minimum wage, lowest in the nation. So low pay. Second was affordable housing. Not having housing that was affordable Unfortunately, we talked to a number of people who shared that they had been living in cars for some parts of their lives. Third was access to affordable childcare when they needed it, because sometimes childcare is not available overnight and unfortunately often not affordable. And the fourth major challenge was access to transportation. We heard case after case of folks in cities who were trying to get more high-paying jobs in the suburbs, but didn't have transportation to get to those jobs. So those are 4 challenges that I learned about that we're trying to address here in Pennsylvania. I would not have known about these without talking to folks who are directly affected.
And keeping on that about directly impacted, right now a lot of people are talking about public safety, these mass shootings. You, of course, have been at the forefront of a lot of this work, your lives, your sharing of your information. Can you just talk a little bit about what your approach is to public safety? Because not only are you looking at this from, a public safety, but also a health and safety aspect, which I think is very needed, but very rare.
Yeah, thank you so much. So these killings, whether they're shooting people down in Buffalo, or racial hate incident, or shooting children in Uvalde or Sandy Hook, or many other places where children have been shot, or the shootings that just happen in the neighborhoods every week, every weekend. These are critical times for our community. We know that the shootings are up. They're up after the pandemic. And my core view is the following. 1, whether the shooting is a mass shooting or one of these slow motion mass shootings of an individual getting shot in neighborhoods, all of the lives count. Now, I know in the media, not all the lives really count the same, and a lot of attention will go to a mass shooting. But I had individuals shot in my district over the weekend. Those lives count. I have fortunate pictures of folks who are deceased in my office. Those lives count. So that's the first step, recognizing that every life counts, whether it's on television or not. Second, there are actions we can take to reduce the violence. So I have a very much of approach of seeking peace. I'm not an anti-violence person. My objective is to try to reach the point of peace. And I believe we can reach peace. There are several activities, programs in cities across the nation that are reducing violence, that are moving us closer to peace. Across the nation, you may have heard of the Cure Violence method, which is getting folks who are ex-offenders to talk to people who are getting ready to be shooters or have been shot, talking them out of that life, steering them toward a better life. That is a program that has worked. Providing intervention, social services to the families, mental health services to the families, job access to our young people. These are all parts of the solution. And so having examples of how we can reduce violence, get to a point of peace, is a core part of my message. And I share, finally, we are sharing examples of what has worked across the nation here in Philadelphia, so that the people can get a sense that there's something that can be done. Now, whether we can get it done in Philadelphia is different than it can't be done. We know violence is being reduced in places across the nation. And what we need to do here is adopt the changes that some of which I've just described. So I'm very hopeful that we can use the talent and energy and creativity that is in our communities, that we know is abundant in our communities, and get it directed, focused toward peace.
Thank you so much. And sticking with the issues of social, unrest and support. We know whether in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or Erie, there is still a lot of Black and brown people who are hurting in this region, and there needs to be a lot of support, whether it's maternal mortality, incarceration, the life expectancy, even the job training and so on and so forth. Given that the legislature is politically split as it is, what are some of the things that you are working to do and hoping to do this year to basically address some of the racial disparities?
Yeah, thanks so much. So We have systemic racism in Pennsylvania. Be crystal clear about that. We have systemic racism, and it's pretty much in every institution. I'll share a couple of things that I'm doing that I think hopefully will have a long-term impact. We began working with the higher education universities, the state universities across Pennsylvania, to focus them on reducing the campus racism. Students, African-American students across this Commonwealth are complaining about being called the N-word and feeling that they don't belong on campus, and students and faculty thinking that they are inferior. A big weight on our students. So we began to look at to what is happening, and we begin to document the instances of student mistreatment. We then have begun to work with the chancellor, who's over the entire state system, as well as the vice chancellor, who's over diversity, equity, and inclusion, to come up with some remedies to reduce the systemic racism. And that includes mandatory diversity training. It includes changing the curriculum so that we can see ourselves in the curriculum. It includes providing mental health services to our young people and more. Now, this is a long-term challenge. The state system of higher education has been built on systemic racism. Pennsylvania is one of the states in the nation that was a segregated higher education system. So it's not going to be resolved in a year or 2 years or 10 years, but we believe we've made a turnaround. On gun violence, we have been really working to do two things. One, provide resources, money resources, to the organizations that have been starved. They've been starved from resources over the years. And these are some community organizations that provide recreation, community organizations that provide mental health, that provide social services, that provide mentoring, getting our young people in a position where they have a neighborhood organization that can give them some hope, job training opportunities. So this is mostly about shifting the resources toward our people. Now, you're right. Harrisburg is a tough place to get any wins. It's a very tough place. But it's hard to appreciate this. The budget is about $40 billion. That's a lot of money. And as much of that money as we can redirect to address systemic racism, that's what I am attempting to do.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's very important to talk about socially and academically, because a lot of people do forget about the racism, the bigotry that happens on our campuses every day. So thank you. And we're talking. You mentioned it earlier about the January 6th situation, and we just had an election. We're still dealing with, people call it the fraud audit, the sham audit, whatever you want to call. We're still dealing with people questioning the integrity of the election. How are you able to get out here and talk to people about voting in November? We just had the primaries. If people aren't really trusting what's happening, so what are some of the things that you're doing to get people engaged and motivated about this upcoming election?
Yeah, thanks so much. And voting is at the core of power. Let me be more clear about this. So I do classroom visits. And what I do is I ask the classroom to split. I have some students, mostly in 12th or, usually 11th or 12th graders, and they are the non-voters. Then the other part of the classroom are the voters. We then make a presentation, me and one of my colleagues make a presentation directly to the voters, and we completely ignore the non-voters. After we make our presentation to those who've been designated to voters, and they decide which one of us they want to win, we then look directly at the non-voters and we say, how does that make you feel that you did not have any role in this outcome? Consistently, they say they've been disrespected, not ignored. So I believe this example of, you can see when the voters get attention, the non-voters don't get attention, that it helps people to see that if you don't vote, you will be ignored. Now, most people I know do not want to be ignored. They want to know that their voice counts. Not voting is the best way to be ignored. So that is one of the messages that I share. The second message I share is particular for Pennsylvania, and that is I'm in the Pennsylvania State Senate with a colleague who's running for governor. We're on the Senate floor together. I've known him for the last 3 years. He believes that the 2020 election was a fraud, and he wanted to throw out all the votes, all 9 million votes. He wanted to throw them all out, and then let the Pennsylvania General Assembly decide who won. Essentially, take the voters out of the equation and let the General Assembly decide who won Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania General Assembly is dominated by Republicans. So this example helps people know there's someone on the ballot who wants to take your vote away and have it replaced by Harrisburg politicians. For most people who hear that, they get very upset, and it helps them to see the value of their vote.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a very interesting way to talk about it. I think a lot of times people I don't want to be too politically divisive, so I won't say anything. But I think you have really good concrete, and again, probably because of the educational background, a really good way of explaining these like really difficult concepts in a very welcoming ways. And staying on this because you said you are in the Senate, and right now inflation is something that a lot of people are worried about. These gas prices, these rent costs, a lot of stuff happening. What I know, technically on a pause right now, but what are some of the things that the Senate can do to really help people really navigate these next couple of months? Because it's being estimated that gas may be over $6, and we don't have the moratorium on evictions anymore, so people are going to be struggling, and it's summer, and that's also when gun violence traditionally increases. So there's a lot on your plate, and I know it's going to be very stressful. But what are some of the things that some of the solutions that can be to these problems?
No, you're right. It's a very challenging time, and gas gets to $5. I don't know what's going to happen. But I would say this. Here's some things that can be done, because solution orientation is key for me. One, we have about $50 million we're trying to get out through our budget to gun violence prevention groups. This will get money to the organizations who are on the ground in the neighborhoods, helping our young people get a productive life. I think that is critical, that there be activities. We're encouraging summer jobs through local businesses. I have a mentoring collaborative where we support those mentoring organizations that are in the city so they can mentor more young people. We can certainly use more support. We have a summer reading program for kids so they can learn to read, not really learn to read, but they can become proficient at reading by 4th grade. And we have served well over 1,000 children in the read by 4th at proficiency, because we know by 4th grade, if you're not reading by proficiency, your chances of success go down dramatically. So those are some of the things that are happening in my office directly. But in terms of policy, we've got a big agenda in Harrisburg to increase the amount of money for housing, particularly preservation, so that home repairs can be made so people can stay in their homes. This is a whole home repair program. I believe we had a good chance of that getting passed, and so people can have a stable place to stay with shelter and not have to move. That's huge. Raising minimum wage obviously has been big on my agenda. I don't see right now that we have enough support from the Republicans to pass the minimum wage, but we got to keep pressing to get that done. So those are a few things that I think we should focus on in the short term. But I would like to share one other thing. There's the short term, and then there's the long term. The abolitionist movement to end enslavement took a long time. The civil rights movement, you got to say, probably started in 1945 and certainly didn't end until 1968 or so. So some social change takes 10 years, takes 20 years. So just because we're in a battle that looks like we haven't won, It could just be that this is a 10-year battle, not a 5-year battle. For instance, I share one other thing in this regard. Much of what happens in the state Senate and in the General Assembly is more like a marathon. It takes a long time to get to the result. Now, you will know that if you are thinking that you are in a race that's a 100-yard dash or 200-yard dash, if you're in a race and you think it's a 200-yard dash and you're not ahead near the end, then you think you're going to lose. But if it's a marathon and you're behind at 200 meters, you got a long way to go. The race is not over. So helping people see that we're often in these marathon social change moments, and it's not a sprint. And the fact that we're behind in the beginning doesn't mean that we're still not going to win when it gets to the end.
Thank you so much. That positivity, it's like said, these are challenging times, and to see you bring this positivity is really necessary and needed. And I know you got some more things to do today, but you also talked, recently about introducing this legislation about independent investigations. You had been working this bill for a while now. Can you just talk a little bit about the bill, where it's going to be at in committee, and some of the next steps about it?
Yeah, thank you so much for raising that. So back in 2015, when I first joined the legislature, I introduced legislation for independent investigation of police-involved killings. Now, at that time, there was the Michael Brown killing, there was the Eric Garner killing, and there was a lot of attention on these police-involved killings. Many people called for an independent investigation. They just didn't want the district attorney from the county doing the investigation, or they didn't want the police department that was involved in the shooting to do the investigation. So we received a lot of support for independent investigations from the community. President Obama had his 21st Century Policing Task Force. One of the recommendations was for independent investigation of police-involved killings. So we've had some support for it. Unfortunately, in the Harrisburg General Assembly, we've had a hard time getting support. We've had 2 hearings. We've gotten some district attorneys to agree. We've gotten some police chiefs to agree, but not quite enough. So we reintroduced it. Glad to say many newspapers have come out in support. The newspaper in Scranton has come out in support. USA Today, the national newspaper, the editorial board came out in support. And so it's right now in the Law and Justice Committee in the state Senate. We hope we can get a vote on it. We're definitely pushing to get a vote on it. I believe all the public support that we can get, all the public pressure that we can get will help us. And this legislation has two key features. First, if the police department that was involved in the shooting cannot investigate itself, that's prohibited. So that's in our legislation. 2, if the county district attorney decides not to prosecute, our state attorney general can take the case without permission. They can take the case if the local district attorney, the county district attorney, declines. This is so important to create the increased oversight and independence. So we've gotten some good support, but we got some distance to go from law enforcement as well as the committee.
And you talked a little bit about the ability for the state's office to take over the case. Can you just talk a little bit about why that's important? A lot of us watched the George Floyd video, and we were able to see how Michigan, through their independent state investigations, actually take over and prosecute these cases. But given how Pennsylvania is, can you just talk a little bit why it's important?
Sure.
Legislation.
Yeah, no, I think we're very similar to as you said, Minnesota. When Attorney General Ellison took over the case, he got to it. He got those folks investigated. He got them prosecuted, and he got a conviction. I got an even better example. Georgia. So when Aubrey was unfortunately killed by the police, God rest his soul, the district attorney for that county did not investigate or prosecute the individuals who shot him and killed him. Now, Then the Georgia Bureau of Investigation took over the case from the county district attorney, and we all know that those individuals were prosecuted and convicted, but it was only because the state took over the case. If the state hadn't taken over that case, the killers of Aubrey, they'd still be on the loose. So that is the best example, and I would say we'll be in the same position here in Pennsylvania. We do have county district attorneys who, they're doing the best they can in pretty much every instance. But I can tell you this: if they decline to take a case after there's been a police-involved shooting or killing, the public is still very concerned and don't fully trust the outcome of these district attorney decisions. I'm not saying the district attorney decisions are wrong, but I do know that there's a lack of public trust in the decisions that they make when they don't prosecute a police-involved killing. This is exactly why we need the Attorney General a step away from these district attorneys to be able to take these cases. I've said over and over again, this legislation is about restoring trust in the system so that everyday people can know that there has been a police-involved killing, there will be an investigation, it will be independent, and we can trust the outcome. I had one police chief tell me he's for independent investigation of police-involved shootings so that if a police officer is cleared, the community will receive him as cleared. As opposed to right now, if a police officer is cleared, that police officer goes into the community and there's still some taint, some question about what happened. And that hurts law enforcement.
Thank you for stating your position, on this matter. And it's really interesting because policing is still, a wildly contested topic. We just had President Biden do his executive order. There's still, with this last police shooting in Texas, mass shooting in Texas, a question about, the integrity of policing. And so as we're having this conversation about public safety, where do you see this conversation going? Because there are people on various, sides, of the aisle who have different interpretations about health and safety, but we all have to work together, and we all don't always agree. But where do you see yourself in this conversation about public safety and reform? And how do you see yourself bringing all these people together for some real solutions?
So, Miracle, I'm not going to say I'm going to be able to bring them all together. So I want to say I can do that. However, I'll let you know where I am and where I think I can help people get to. One, police officers are doing an almost impossible job of policing in an armed society. There's no other police in the world that have to police folks who are fully armed. This creates a tremendous challenge for all police officers and really for all civilians to know that your neighbor can have an AR-15 or 2 or 3 of them. And so one of the things we've got to do is get some of these guns out of the hands of dangerous people. That's for the police. That's for us. And so I am really pushing requirements to have a permit to carry a gun, a permit to purchase that includes your fingerprint. This has gone a long way in cutting down dangerous people getting access to guns. So that's number one. That's for ourselves, but also for police officers, because policing in an armed society is very challenging. Second, we need to provide more human services to our neighbors. Human services including mental health services, social services, access to jobs, recreation. You'll see that, for instance, in Texas, the governor cut mental health services. This is a recipe for disaster, cutting the very services that can help individuals. A friend of mine said, who ran a drug treatment program when we cut services for folks here in Pennsylvania, he said, Art, you know something? These individuals don't go away just because you cut their funding. It means they may be more likely to now get involved in some kind of petty robbery. So we must provide the human services support so individuals have hope and some opportunity. And then third, on law enforcement, I believe that there's significant improvements that have yet to be made in law enforcement. Some of it is community policing, body cameras, training. So I think that law enforcement improvements are still available and should be made. So those would be my top three. Number one, we've got to get some of these guns out of the hands of dangerous people. Number two, we've got to provide more human services support for our neighbors and those who are at risk and in need. And three, yes, there are significant law enforcement improvements that can be made in terms of how law enforcement operates. But those will be the top three areas where I think we can bring people together. And if you don't support one, maybe you can support another to get to the end.
Thank you for that. And as we wrap, we know this election cycle has been the first time under these new maps. A lot of people have, said these are really great maps because it allows more people to have a reflective democracy. Some people say they hate the maps. But this whole entire process, do you have any thoughts or feedback on the redistricting process now that we have like the first election under the belt?
Yeah, I have a couple of, thanks so much for that question. So number one, I think the new maps are fairer so that there are more districts that either a Democrat or Republican could win. And so I think that is an improvement so that the districts are not just fully benefiting Republicans or fully benefiting Democrats. These maps seem to be more fair in terms of some balance. So I think that is the case. Number two, the maps are heavily influenced by politicians in Harrisburg. I was asked a question about the map for my district. I'm certain that every other legislator was asked about maps for their district. We need to have an independent commission to draw these maps and not ask Harrisburg elected officials who are incumbents what they would like to see in the map, if anything. So this was a clear example to me. We need an independent commission to draw the maps in the future so that the politicians who are incumbents don't get to put an extra influence on what the maps look like. Third, no matter what the maps are, in order to win, you need a strong candidate and a strong campaign. The 2010 maps, the maps that everybody complained about as gerrymandered and wrong, those 2010 maps had some results I'd like to quickly share. First, there were at least 6 states, Pennsylvania State Senate districts, where Biden won, Clinton won, Wolf won, Casey won. Pennsylvania State Senate districts where Democrats won at the statewide level. But these are districts represented by Republicans. So even though there's a bunch of Democrats in that district, enough so that Hillary, Biden, Wolf, and Casey could win, enough for them to win, the local state Senate representative is a Republican. That means to me, these are districts where you still need a strong candidate and a strong campaign. No matter what the district is, if you don't have a strong candidate and a strong campaign, the district alone is not going to save you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And as we wrap up, can you just tell people how they can get in contact with you in your office, or they can follow you and watch some of your lives and your addresses on social media?
So first of all, I really want to thank you for allowing me on, Miracle, and the whole team. I really appreciate this opportunity. I am on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Senator Haywood. My website is senatorhaywood.com. We have a Facebook Live every Thursday, 11 to 11:30, and we bring on guests from around the state, really around the nation, to talk about issues that are important to folks. And we do try to share what's happening on social media. But I cannot thank you all enough for allowing me to share what we're trying to do on your show. Thank you so much.
Of course. And our last question we ask everyone is, what is bringing you joy? It's hard to be a politician right now. A lot of stuff is going on in these troubling times. What is something that's bringing you joy?
Number one, jazz. I listen to a lot of jazz. I wake up and listen to jazz. And so I don't know if it's an escape, but jazz brings me a lot of joy. Last, this may seem like an exaggeration to folks, but I have started a small garden to grow some fresh vegetables. Now, I call myself a farmer, but my wife says the garden is too small for me to be considered a farmer. But nevertheless, I think I consider myself an urban farmer. We're growing sweet potato, we're growing tomatoes, and we're growing some corn. And so that's bringing me quite a bit of joy that I can actually be a farmer, although my wife says I'm not.
All right. Well, I will leave it to you and your wife to determine who's a farmer and who's not. But I do thank you so much for joining us this edition of the 100 Powers Sunday Night Sit Down. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mr. Haywood.
Thank you so much. Thank you again.
This has been another edition of the Sunday Night Sit Down. I'm your host, Miracle Jones. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Like we said today, there's a lot of stuff happening in the world going on. And so we always want to just give you some joy, some things to be mindful of and be happy of that are out here, and ways that you can make a difference as we wrap up, this Pride weekend and get ready for Juneteenth. I hope you all are happy and safe and have heard about some really good things that you can do to get involved. Senator mentioned the reading program, the mentoring program, the job trainings, some initiatives that he's putting forward, up. So please reach out so you can show up, support, volunteer. We have some great programming for you this week. So make sure you're tuned into the One Hood Media Network. And with that, I'm your host, Miracle Jones. Have a good rest of your evening. Bye.